All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's your boy Akeem from Pro Football Exclusive, here to continue with my 2014 NFL draft grades. For this particular blog, I'm here to talk about the NFC North Division. I think all four of these teams did a pretty decent job, actually a pretty good job overall. Starting with the Chicago Bears, I had to give them a B+ for their efforts this season. With their first pick, they went with Kyle Fuller, the cornerback out of Virginia Tech. Now, I think this was a great pick because that secondary, particularly at cornerback, Tim Jennings and Charles Tillman, they're actually good veterans, but they're actually aging. Charles Tillman's actually entering his 12th season, while Jennings is entering his 9th year, and I think he could be a great fill-in. Talk about Kyle Fuller to replace them in the near future. In the second round, they picked up a good defensive tackle from LSU. Ego Ferguson posted up 58 tackles. And in the following pick, they went with another defensive tackle, a big Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year award winner, Will Sutton out of Arizona State. I think these two pickups were great to replace Henry Melton. I think both these two players can work well together in a great rotation in a 4-3 defense. In the fourth round, they went with a good running back, Kadeem Carey out of Arizona. I think he could be that definitely well-worked number 2 behind Matt Forte, who had 1,339 yards rushing. And the second leading rusher was Michael Bush with just 191 yards. So Forte could use some help at running back and a good backup, and I think Carey can be that guy. I think that was a great pick. In the fourth round, they picked up Shane Vereen's younger brother, Brock Vereen, out of the safety coming out of Minnesota. Now, Major Wright is actually no longer with the team. Chris Conte had a decent season, but with Wright gone, they're going to have to fill in the void at the safety position. I think this was a decent pick, kid out of Minnesota Big Ten Conference. In the sixth round, jumping all the way to the sixth round, David Fales. Now, he was my sleeper at the quarterback position, and even my sleeper overall headed towards this year's draft. One of my top sleepers. He's a good quarterback coming out of San Jose State, and I think he'd become a decent backup behind Jay Cutler. I do not really like Cutler's character and demeanor, and I really think the Chicago Bears should have went earlier with a quarterback to replace him. Not really feeling Cutler's play, and even all his overall leadership and demeanor. He's not really too much of a leader of that Bear offense, but he's still a decent quarterback, and they still count on him as his franchise player. Now, sticking in the sixth round, they went with a punter out of the U, Pat O'Donnell, decent player. Drew Butler could be in question of who will be that starting punter for the team. And then with their final pick, they went with Charles Leonard, the offensive tackle out of Boise State. I think he has decent feet, still needs some techniques he needs to work on with his hands, but I still think he's a good offensive tackle. In the seventh round, I think that could be a little bit of a steal. I think he has a chance of making the 53-man roster. So overall for this team, I have to give them a B+. Next team we need to talk about is the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I love their picks. Starting with their first selection, they actually had 2 first-round picks. First pick at number 9 overall, they went with Anthony Barr out of UCLA, a great pass rusher to replace Jared Allen. And I think with him and Chad Greenway, I think these two players can work well together. Greenway could run from sideline to sideline, collecting a lot of tackles, and they could have that premier pass rusher that they're looking for in Anthony Barr. And sticking within the first round, they traded up with the Seattle Seahawks to get the last pick of the first round, and they went with their quarterback and Teddy Bridgewater out of Louisville. I think this was a great selection, and I think he could be the good future franchise quarterback for the Vikings. I think out of all the quarterbacks entering this year's draft, he's the best passing ready, most passing ready quarterback out of all the players. Even though despite the fact that he had a terrible pro day workout, I think he's the still best passing ready quarterback headed towards this year's season as a rookie. Skipping up to the third round, they had 2 third-round picks, and I think these two players are great picks. Starting with Scott Creighton out of Oregon State, the defensive end. Now, he actually combined for 51 tackles for losses for the last 3 seasons as a Beaver. I think this was going to be a good addition for the Vikings to replace Jared Allen at defensive end. And sticking with the third round, they picked up a great backup in running back Jarrett McKinnon out of Georgia Southern. Now, I gave you guys a scout report on this particular player, and he actually had the best running back workout out of all the running backs combined at the scouting combine. That's just my personal opinion, and the numbers do not lie. Great broad jump, good 4.40 at 220, 230 pounds. He's a great size, and I think even though he was a quarterback at Georgia Southern, he was more used like a running quarterback because they used that triple option, which they used for the Eagles of Georgia Southern. I think he could convert well at running back and work behind Adrian Peterson. Even though Matt Asaita is another running back for the Vikings, Vikings, I don't really see him up to par as a number 2 back. And with Toby Gerhardt gone, this was the perfect opportunity for Jerick McKinnon. And for fantasy football players out there, I think a lot of people should definitely pick Jerick McKinnon in the later rounds, because especially if Adrian Peterson gets hurt, McKinnon's definitely going to pull up some decent numbers. In the 5th round, they went with David Yankee, a guard out of Stanford. Now, before Xavier Zuafilo out of UCLA, before I switched him into my number 1 offensive guard, I actually had David Yankee out of Stanford as my number 1 offensive guard, and I think this was a great pick in the 5th round, a little bit of a steal. In the 6th round, they had another steal in Antoine Exum out of Virginia Tech. He could play either safety or cornerback, but I think he's going to be probably used more as a cornerback. Now, entering the 2013 season, he was coming back from a torn ACL back in January 2013. He was playing a pickup basketball game in which he torn his ACL. He ended up coming back in October, but then missing the remainder of the season due to an ankle injury, and that's why his stock dropped into the 6th round. But I still think back when he did in 2012, he could probably do the same thing, cause some pass breakups, and even commit some turnovers. I think he had 5 interceptions back in 2012. Sticking in the 6th round, they went with another defensive back out of Maine, Kendall James. He's a decent player. In the 7th round, they had a couple of decent picks that I do like. Starting with defensive tackle out of UConn, Shamar Stevens. He actually had 60 tackles last season with 10 tackles for loss. Brandon Watts, this was a questionable pick because he's a little bit undersized at outside linebacker at 6'1", 225 pounds, and he wasn't really a player who was a pass rusher or a player who could get behind the line of scrimmage. He's a decent player. I think he might even convert as a defensive back due to his size. He does run a 4.4 40. And last but not least, with their final selection, Jabari Price. He definitely is a good tackler, good player overall at cornerback, but he struggles finding the football. This is a player out of North Carolina. Price is a decent player tackling the football, but he has a hard time locating, and that's why he didn't really have that many interceptions. Throughout his career, he only had 2 interceptions, and that's why his stock dropped pretty low, and that's why he ended up a 7th round pick, but I still think he's a decent selection. So overall, for the Minnesota Vikings, I have to give them a straight A for their efforts, especially in that 3rd round with McKinnon and Creechin out of Oregon State. That was a great picks. Next thing we need to talk about, the Green Bay Packers. It's another good draft. Starting with the 1st round, a steal in the 1st round with Clinton Dix. They needed a safety, and they got the best one available headed towards this year's draft. In the 2nd round, they went with the receiver, Devontae Adams. Even though I think that Jared Boykin deserves a chance, let's not forget about Jordy Nelson. He was their leading target with over 1,300 yards receiving last season. And let's not forget about Randall Cobb. He's a good slot receiver, but I still think this was a great addition with Adams coming out of Fresno State, good receiver overall. And the next pick in the 3rd round, they actually had 2 3rd-round picks. First pick was Kyrie Thornton, a defensive tackle out of Southern Miss. Wasn't really feeling this selection. I think they could have picked up a couple other better defensive tackles to work with B.J. Raji. And sticking with the 3rd round, they picked up a good tight end out of California, and Richard Rodgers, who actually had coming off his best season, 39 receptions last year and 608 yards. He could probably be that leading tight end target for Aaron Rodgers, a good target coming out of Cal, the same school as Aaron Rodgers. In the 4th round, they picked up a great outside linebacker out of Arizona State, Justin Gotti, our guy from Pro Football Exclusive, his man at Arizona State, Carl Bradford. Now, over the past couple of seasons, he had 39.5 tackles for loss and 20 sacks. As a Sun Devil, I think he's a ruthless player. He plays with great tenacity, and I think he could definitely boost up that depth chart with other great pass rushers like Clay Matthews with the mix at outside linebacker. And also, let's not forget about A.J. Hawk. He's a good middle linebacker. Next pick in the 5th round, they went with Corey Linsley out of Ohio State at center to help out the offensive line. Sticking with the 5th round, they went with Jared Abbrederis, a wide receiver from Wisconsin. Now, he had a quiet but very productive career as a Badger, taking the Badgers to a Rose Bowl, even though they lost to Oregon. As well as Stanford. He still had a great career as a Badger, even helping them win a couple of Big Ten championships. In the 6th round, they went with a decent corner who has great cover skills, a little bit like Deion Sanders, but he doesn't really do well tackling. He only had 26 tackles last season. Talking about Dimitri Goodson out of Baylor, he had 13 pass breakups and 3 interceptions last season, which are good numbers, but only 26 tackles, just like Deion. Good cover skills, but as far as run support, you can't really support on him to step it up. And with their final pick, now this is a great pick at receiver, Jeff Janis out of Saginaw Valley State, and I even have him as my sleeper at the receiver position. He has great size, 219 pounds at 6'2", but he doesn't really play up to the size level. He needs to really, especially needs to work on his blocking technique. With a man his size, he shouldn't have much of a problem dealing with smaller cornerbacks, but he does struggle even at the Division II level. That's why he's all the way at the 7th round, but I'm still happy for him being picked in this year's draft. So overall, for their grades, for the Green Bay Packers grade, I have to give them a B+. I think they did a good job with the steal of Clinton Dix, and even with that final pick with Jeff Janis, I think he could be a good sleeper at wide receiver. Last but not least, the Detroit Lions. They had a decent draft overall. Starting with their first pick, it was a little bit of a question mark for me, but I understand why they went with this direction. They went with a tight end, Eric Ebron out of North Carolina. Now, they just recently signed Brandon Pettigrew during this offseason, but they went with a better playmaker at tight end, and I understand that why they went with Eric Ebron. He's a little bit more versatile than Pettigrew, who could be where Ebron could be used like Vernon Davis from the San Francisco 49ers, be used as a slot and even as a wide receiver, but a tight end, and he can still line up at the tight end position. Now, his blocking technique and his blocking skills, not really up to what you want, a little bit mediocre, but he is an outstanding receiver at tight end. I think he could do a better job than Brandon Pettigrew, so I understand why the Lions went with that direction. In the second pick, in the second round, they picked up a great pass rusher, Kyle Van Noy out of BYU. Now, he's going to be reteaming with Ziggy Anston. I think this is going to be very dangerous because they know each other pretty well, very familiar with each other, and I think these two players could become good pass rushers that the Detroit Lions are looking for. Now, they can still use some help at the secondary, but they picked up some great defensive. They have a great defensive line, and they picked up another good pass rusher opposite of Ziggy Anston, who had 8 sacks last season. In the third round, they went with Travis Swanson, the center out of Arkansas. That was a decent selection. In the fourth round, they picked up an interesting cornerback out of Utah State, Nevin Lawson. Now, he's a player who will tackle. Cover skills is a little bit above average. That's just my opinion. I think he's a decent player out of Mountain West. And then for the next two selections in the rounds 4 and 5, they went with players who was coming from lower divisions, lower levels of college football. First, with the pick in the fourth round, Larry Webster out of Bloomsburg. He's a great defensive end, pulled up big numbers, 88 tackles for the past 2 seasons, 31 tackles for loss, and 26 sacks. Those are good numbers at the defensive end position, but he did play at a lower level, and he's a little bit undersized at 252 pounds at 6'5". He has that Jason Taylor slim type body at the defensive end, but I still think he could become a good pass rusher for the Detroit Lions. In the fifth round, they picked up another player from the lower division for coming out of Princeton, a smart school, Ivy League school, Corin Reed. He's definitely a disruptive defensive tackle that they're definitely looking for to work in a good rotation with Nick Fairley and Ndamukong Suh. Now, he definitely draws a lot of attention, a lot of double teams, which will actually free things up with other players, other teammates around him. But he struggles against double teams, and that's why his stock dropped just a little bit. He's a great reckless player before the past 2 seasons compared to what he did back in 2011, where he posted over 60 tackles. His tackling numbers dropped, and even to this season, he only had 26 tackles. In the 6th round, they went with TJ Jones, the wide receiver out of Notre Dame, and now he's definitely following his belated father's footsteps and joining the National Football League, coming off his best season yet as a Fighting Irish player. He had 70 catches last season, 1,108 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Those are good numbers. I think this could be a decent pick. Hopefully, he can make the 53-man roster at the wide receiver, but he does have some competition that he has to deal with. And with their final selection, they went with Nate Freeze out of Boston College, the place kicker. They had to go with special teams, and there's nothing wrong with going special teams in the 7th round. I think he's a decent kicker, and I think he should be able to make the team. So overall for this team, the Detroit Lions, I have to give them a solid B. They have a couple of questionable picks. We're going with lower level players, but I do understand the Eric Ebron selection, and I do like the Kyle Van Noy. I think this could be a great selection, working opposite of a former teammate, Ziggy Anston. I think this could be a good pick. So overall, I have to give him a B. Now, the next time I'm going to catch you guys is tomorrow, where I'm going to continue things on with my grades with the NFC South Division. Thank you for watching this vlog from Pro Football Exclusive. I'm your man, Akeem McCall. Be easy.